dear colleagues. It's a great pleasure to open this week of intervention. And let's focus a little bit differently. We still are on the archives, but let me raise a question. How to develop the historical memory to support a democratic project? In the end, because that's why we're here, we are all supporting a democratic project. So let's make a small step back and see how we can contribute to this kind of project. On the next slide, you see that I will approach this through a question of ideation. Some people have some visions, some people have some dreams, they sometimes say it. And there, let me address it through a question of ideation. On the next slide, we will see that the European Union project started in the 50s, the post-Second World War. And I just took a quote from Alcide de Gasperi. He was former IT prime minister. He died in 1954. So it only saw the beginning of this European project. But what Alcide de Gasperi said is that future will not be built through force, nor the desire to conquer, but by the passionate application of the democratic method, the constructive spirit of agreement, and by respect for freedom. And that's really, for me, one of the long-range vision that leads to the kind of project that we are involved as a democratic project. And I will focus on one part of this sentence, which is constructive spirit of agreement. And on the next slide, you see how I address this one. I will consider it, and this is the last time you will see sentences on the slides. It's developing an historical memory to support a democratic project, and it will involve fostering a collective understanding and appreciation of nations' history or supranational history, with an emphasis on democratic values, principles, and lessons learned from the past. So that's a global way we will try to contribute to this democratic project that we are living in currently. And how do we do that in the archives? On the next slide, you see that we have the function to collect and preserve for future generation a certain number of artifacts that we call documents, and that can take any kind of forms. Could be multimedia, it could be handwritten documents, could be papers. So all these assets, all these artifacts will be preserved for future generation and to serve this project of building the historical memory. What do we have in the European Parliament? We have more than 5 kilometers of paper archives. Part are preserved in the European Parliament in Luxembourg, part are preserved in the European Union Institute in Florence. We have more than 1 terabyte of digital archives that we are also currently processing. But it's not only documents or written documents. We also have 48,000 hours of footage that are coming from any kind of events, auditions, committee meetings, plenary sittings. So all these things are kept also. More than 600,000 photos. And more or less, we can say that we have all archived documents since 1952. So 1952 was the creation of the Common Assembly. So there's the very old part of the European Parliament, and then became the Parliamentary Assembly and the European Parliament. But we are extremely lucky. The archive function was one of the first functions set in the administration on the Common Assembly in 1952. So for us, it's extremely important. So how to address or support as an archives to a democratic project in a way that I framed it before. Let me propose you a framework with 4 different parts, and let's dive into the first one, education and awareness. So that's the title of the next slide. How do we support education and awareness? I would read through ensuring that history is taught in schools with a focus on critical thinking, inclusivity, and balanced perspectives. Encourage a study of local and global history to understand the context of democratic movements and developments. Promote access to historical records, archives, and libraries so that citizens can explore and research their nation history, but also support digital initiatives to make historical information more accessible to a wider audience. So how do we place ourselves as an archive function within this first orientation of first part of the framework? On the next slide, we see some examples of products that we built mainly to support or contact with the civil society and school, back to school, going back to the students, going back to the universities. And we are frequently making conferences, interventions to explain what collective memory is, what the history is, because it's also for us a matter of accountability. So to understand all the decision, all the paths that was followed that lead to the current situation, and that also frame the ground for the future generation and future decisions. You've got on one side the European School in Luxembourg with students for which I made a conference some months ago. And on the other side, you've got the Jean Monnet House, which is close to Paris in France, which is a center which is used by the European Parliament to promote the approach of Jean Monnet, that was one of the main collaborators from Robert Schuman, that was at the foundation, one of the founding fathers of the European Union project and the European project. So these are two kinds of activities on this place we are promoting through presentation, or sometimes movies, booklets that can be used, played, and explained to a citizen what the history is in an educational matter with this kind of approach. The second angle I mentioned also in this part on the education and awareness, and that you find on the next slide, are digital initiatives, making information, making history, making archives being accessible on a digital way. And let's say in the 80s, 90s, if you wanted to consult an archive, if you wanted to have a book or information about history, you had to come to the place yourself. You have to visit the place. No, that's not the case anymore. So since 10 years, 15 years, you can access this information, many of this information or public information online. And on the left side, you've got the website that we build in order to provide the accessibility of all data we have, also providing some historical context to the archives. But we are also working with Europeana, which is a project funded by the European Union that promotes archives, sharing archives, and any kind of assets that will be used to promote them, including digital exhibitions. And it works. It works. People are coming. People are interested in history and also in archives. Archives being the cement of this historical approach. We had more than 340,000 visitors since 2020 over 7 digital exhibitions we did. Nobody thought it could be done before. People told us that we will fail 4 years ago because it was not a practice. And it was, we just demonstrated that we could do it, and it's successful. It's something that works. So that the way we approach is also to stimulate the access to digital information. The next slide is about to access digital records. We initiated a huge work to make public historical archives from the Parliament. We started in 1952. We are now arriving to 1984 because we control each asset one by one. So the million of documents, the million of archives you see there being accessible through our site has been controlled one by one, metadata per metadata, and physical documents, let's say digital document to be accessed by people. And also, compared to this previous way to access information, we get used to have, let's say, one demand per day to access historical archives from the European Parliament, from the civil society or within the institution. And we had more than 7,000 requests, or let's say digital sessions, since 2022, since we opened this dashboard to access public archives. So compare the two numbers. One is digital access, the other one is almost, let's say, physical demand that we receive. It's useful. People are accessing it and people are making use of it. So that's a standard approach. And the next slide, you see that we also take the opportunity to deploy AI algorithm in our activities. This is the current state of today: automatic classification, topic visualization, but also automatic summarization. This AI algorithm fits extremely well when you know the use case to which you adapt them. So that's not the topic of today, but please make sure that when you have a use case that you want to support with AI algorithm, you select the right use case with the right data. That's the case also for summarization. This is the state of art of today. This morning, I had the information from my IT staff that we have the new generation. In 2 months, we will have the second generation. So shift is extremely fast in AI. So that's the second dimension. That's, let's say, the dimension of making things accessible and trying to provide the means of people to find what they're looking for into the archives. The second orientation, the next slide for this framework, will be cultural and public engagement. So how to do that? Establish museums, monuments, and memorials dedicated to the nations or supranational democratic struggles, historical figures, and milestones. Use these spaces as educational tools to engage visitors in a meaningful way. Encourage public forums, discussion, and debates about historical events, their impact on democracy, and the values that they underpin it. Promote the inclusion of diverse perspectives to enrich the discourse. Support the creation of documentaries, films, literature, and art that explore and celebrate democratic history. Use media and culture to engage a wider audience in historical narratives. So how do we implement that? Making use of our archives. On the next slide, you see that it's not directly related to us, but we are partners of the museum. This is the House of the European Union. It's in Belgium, in Brussels. It's open for free to citizens, and they can relate to the European history, not only the European Union history, but European history, the history of the continent itself. And this helps also to promote any kind of arts and presentations and tools that will support the understanding of how this project was built and the place it's found in the society, and it's free. So it's just open for culture. On the next slide, you see that we also support public forums and debates. And this is everything that talks about the history and where we come from, where we are going to, because it's also based on where we come from. And the House of the European History also provides a support for very frequent lectures. So we are also partnering with them for providing information or promoting their work in order to disseminate all this information and make them accessible as a kind of hub, an historical hub where you can find everything on the same place. And the last one is about documentaries on the next slide. Each of the digital exhibitions that we are doing are accompanied by a small documentary, each of them. And just to quote one, this one, for instance, about the German reunification and the fall of the Berlin Wall was seen by 28,000 viewers only in 2023. So it's a product that has been designed and it's heavily used in Strasbourg. And it was also designed because of the situation. Strasbourg is close to the German border and we have many German visitors. So we also use this place to promote, and in the end, people are viewing, people are looking at it, and you access this kind of information. You look at Berlin in 61 and Berlin in 89. We will both agree that the wall doesn't look like the same, but these are all the kind of images and history that we are bringing forward. If we move to the next pillar, which will be the third pillar, it's about civic participation and reconciliation. This is something which is extremely important to a democratic project. Foster civic engagement by connecting historical events and democratic principles to contemporary issues. Encourage participation in democratic processes such as voting, activism, and community involvement. And maybe something which is extremely important, acknowledge and address past injustices such as human rights abuses or discrimination to promote healing and unity. And more important, the last one, truth and reconciliation processes can help a nation to confront its history honestly. And this is something that we do not necessarily talk about because it's seen as being quite complex and very difficult on the sociological point of view. But that's a foundation of the stability of the society we are living in. And how we do support that with the next slide, we are approaching it by support of the function of the institution. The first one is about Sakharov Prize, and this is the prize for the liberty of spirit, and created by the European Parliament on the name of Sakharov. On the left side, you see the video, which is a documentary promoting this approach with the Vice President, Heidi Hautala, that was made 2 years ago. And on the right side, you see that we are also promoting by the editing of booklets, this type of approach that we make accessible to visitors. In 2023, there was around 180 80,000 visitors that went to the visitor center in Strasbourg inside the premises of the parliament. 42,000 historical booklets produced, edited by the archives unit were reprinted. So imagine that only since the beginning of the year, 1 out of 4 visitors left the building with something that was not given to them, but that they choose to pick up with themselves and then to consult later on. That's also an impact, a direct impact that we have on the civil society. And you will learn things if you see on the next slide that, for instance, on the Sakharov Prize, the first laureates in 1988 were not only 1, but 2. Nelson Mandela was chosen for South Africa, but in the same time, Anatoly Marchenko, posthumously from Russia, was chosen by Andrei Sakharov himself. He said, okay, I agree to give my name to the prize. And on the first one, there will be someone chosen, but I'd like to be in a position to address a second person. And this was Marchenko from Russia for the same prize. So that's a way that we also participate in this reconciliation and civic participation. And that's really, I insist on this one. That's one of the bricks for the foundation of a stable civil society. And the next point, which is the fourth pillar of my approach, is leadership and international cooperation. What does it go through? Political leaders should champion democratic values and principles using historical examples to illustrate the importance of these ideals. Leading by example and uploading democratic norms, collaborating with international organizations and other countries to share best practices and lessons on promoting historical memory for democracy. And one which is maybe the big point for this part of the framework, which is be vigilant against attempts to rewrite or distort history for political or ideological reasons, and encouraging historical accuracy and objectivity. And that's where the place of archives is fundamental. Regularly assess the effectiveness of your efforts in developing historical memory for a democratic project and adjust strategies as needed. And how do we place ourselves in this last point? It's just, okay, first examples on next slide with political leaders, how do they want to involve them? And they do. There's a little bit of text on the image on the left, but this was an exhibition that we did on the request of the Secretary General, Klaus Welle, for the inauguration of the Adenauer building. And you can see on this one that we have the Grand Duke Henry of Luxembourg, the Grand Duchess Maria Theresa of Luxembourg, the President of the European Parliament, the Prime Minister of Luxembourg, a Quaestor, but also the Secretary General of the European Parliament. All top leaders in Luxembourg were on this photo, following what was introduced, and then publicizing this artifact, this exhibition that we did, this type of exhibition that we did on the request of the Secretary General. And on the right side, you've got an image from an oral history project that we have done with Astrid Lulling, a Luxembourgish member, who had the chance to be among the first one to see in the 50s the creation of the European Union project, as being an assistant, as being involved in the legislative project and then becoming a member for Luxembourg. This was the photo of the last time the European Parliament earned this hemicycle in Luxembourg, called the Schuman hemicycle, the first one being held by the Parliament that we sent back to the Luxembourgish state. So this was one day before we closed this building to celebrate this place, and also to celebrate Astrid Lulling as one of the women who participated in the construction of the European Union project. And you can see when you introduce democratic values and when you introduce the purpose of your work, look at the face. She was a member, and you can also look at mine. It was an extraordinary moment. Collaborating and share, on the next slide, we are collaborating and sharing with any kind of entity. So we are collaborating not only with peers, such as the Interparliamentary Union Network, but also with the private sector. And there you see the images on the Public Sector Service Symposium 22. The case that was illustrated by AWS in the keynote speech for opening the conference was the one of the European Parliament and the one of the archives of the European Parliament. Can you figure that? An archive entity being the opening of a tech session by Amazon for the public sector. That was an extraordinary movement on the right top right, you've got Marco Mabilino, who is the leader of this project. And trust me, he's extremely good, and he's not young. He's 62, so I apologize for giving his age online, but don't think that AI is only for young people and a geek things. You can also be 62 and be super efficient in artificial intelligence. We said on the last slide, it was important also to regularly assess the effectiveness of the work. And all that we are doing is reviewed on a monthly basis by activities, but also on client satisfaction. Each time someone is accessing our archives, requesting us for an information, or we are participating in an event, we are requesting a client satisfaction, not only with scoring, but also with opinions that we can reinvest in our activity. And on the right side, you've got basic functions. I'll just illustrate some of them, but of course we have more than that, which is just trying to look for our internal efficiency and see how we have to put our resources compared to the mission that we have. So if we come to the final slide for the conclusion, how to develop the historical memory to support democratic project, dear colleagues in France, it's really time to engage your archives. Thank you very much, and very glad to kick off this week.